Hi, r.w.forder. Annie Besant, 1st of October 1847 to the 20th of September 1933. Annie was the daughter of Emily and William Wood, a lower middle class couple. Her father died when she was only 5, leaving Annie's mother, Emily, in difficult circumstances. She found work looking after boarders at Harrow School. Here is Annie with her mother. Annie went to live with Ellen Marryat, sister of the famous naval novelist, Captain Frederick Marryat. Ellen provided Annie with a good liberal education. According to Annie's autobiography, and I quote, "Miss Marryat had a perfect genius for teaching. She taught us everything herself except music, and for this she had a master, practicing us in composition, in recitation, in reading aloud English and French, and later German, devoting herself to training us in the soundest, most thorough fashion. No words of mine can tell you how much I owe her, not only of knowledge, but of that love of knowledge which has remained with me ever since as a constant spur to study." Marryat was also an evangelical. So Annie also wrote, "Sin, damnation, conversion, and permanent recourse to the scriptures formed the regime." Annie left Miss Marryat's care as an attractive, petite figure with dark hair. She was a highly articulate, strong-willed firebrand, but at this time, extremely devout. In April 1666, she met the Reverend Frank Besant, brother of Sir Walter Besant, historian and novelist. Frank had also been educated at Cambridge and was now a deacon in Clapham. According to Anne Taylor, one of Annie's biographers, he was an impecunious, parsimonious, stiff-necked young man from Portsea, whose evangelicism was serious. Here we have Frank in middle age. Frank proposed marriage to Annie, which she accepted, but later bitterly regretted. I quote, "In truth, I ought never to have married, for under the soft, loving, pliable girl there lay hidden, as much unknown to herself as to her surroundings, a woman of strong, dominant will, strength that panted for expression and rebelled against restraint, fiery and passionate emotions that were seething under compression, a most undesirable partner to sit in the lady's armchair on the domestic rug before the fire." By the time she was 23, she had 2 children, Digby and Mabel. Both had been difficult births, but when Annie suggested to Frank that they should limit their family, he gave her a beating. Unsurprisingly, she came to question her marriage and her husband's views. First, she was influenced by the sermons of Charles Voysey, a dissenting minister who questioned the authority of the Bible. Then she came under Thomas Scott's influence, an elderly freethinker and Ramsgate publisher. Annie began to write for Scott. Frank became aware and issued an ultimatum. Either stop writing in a Ten church and take Holy Communion, or leave. She chose the latter, despite having to leave Digby in the care of his father. In July 1874, Annie purchased a copy of the National Reformer, edited by the notorious infidel Charles Bradlaugh. The National Reformer advocated atheistic secularism, universal suffrage, and republicanism, and reported the activities of the National Secular Society, which Bradlaugh founded in 1866 and to which he had been elected president. Here we have an image of Charles Bradlaugh. Annie attended her first NSS meeting on the 2nd of August 1874. This is how she described the scene. The hall was crowded to suffocation, and at the very moment announced for the lecture, a roar of cheering burst forth. A tall figure passed swiftly up the hall to the platform, and with a slight bow, in answer to the voluminous greeting, Charles Bradlaugh took his seat. I looked at him with interest, impressed and surprised. The grave, quiet, stern, strong face, the massive head, the keen eyes, the magnificent breadth and height of forehead. Was this the man I had heard described as a blatant agitator, an ignorant demagogue? Began quietly and simply, tracing out the resemblances between the Krishna and the Christ myths, and he went from point to point. His voice grew in force and resonance, till it rang round the hall like a trumpet. Familiar with the subject, I could test the value of his treatment of it, and saw that his knowledge was as sound as his language was splendid. Eloquence, fire, sarcasm, pathos, passion, all in turn were bent against Christian superstition, until the great audience, carried away by the torrent of the orator's force, hung silent, breathing soft, as he went on, till the silence that followed, a magnificent peroration, broke the spell, and a hurricane of cheers relieved the tension. Annie soon became friends with Bradlaugh, and she was offered a job on the National Reformer. She also accepted Bradlaugh's invitation to give lectures on subjects she felt strongly about. Her first was on the political status of women. Hypatia, Bradlaugh's daughter, wrote of Annie. She was very fluent, with a great command of language, and her voice carried well. Her throat, weak at first, rapidly gained in strength until she became a most forcible speaker. Tireless as a worker, she could both write and study longer without rest and respite than any other person I have known. And such was her power of concentration that she could work under circumstances which would have confounded almost anyone else. Though not an original thinker, she had a really wonderful power of absorbing the thoughts of others, of blending them, and of transmuting them into glowing language. Her industry, her enthusiasm, and her eloquence made of her a very powerful ally to whatever cause she espoused. Here we have some of Annie's early publications. From this date on, and well into the 1880s, Annie became prolific, writing on free thought and theological subjects, and on social and political reform, often with a feminist slant. A Free Thought Publishing Company catalogue of 1883 lists 43 Besant pamphlets and 7 full-length books. Add to that numerous contributions to the National Reformer and her own journal, Our Corner, plus talks and debates all over the country. There was much discussion of the bond between Bradlaugh and Besant. However, there is no evidence that there was a sexual relationship between them. In 1877, Bradlaugh and Besant republished a birth control tract entitled The Fruits of Philosophy, and I shall relate that story as a separate episode, as I will Bradlaugh's struggle to enter Parliament. From about 1800, Annie was moving towards socialism and away from individualistic radicalism of the type advocated by Bradlaugh and many NSS members. The differences between Bradlaugh and Besant are best illustrated, perhaps, by two quotations. First, Bradlaugh in a speech at St James's Hall on the 17th of April 1884. We recognise the most serious evils, and especially in large centres of population, arising out of the poverty already existing, aggravating and intensifying the crime, disease and misery developed from it. I want to remedy the evil, attacking it in detail by the action of the individuals most affected by it. Social reform is one thing because it is reform. Socialism is the opposite because it is revolution. Now, I have said that in order to effect socialism in this country, and I am only dealing with this country, it would require a physical force revolution, because you would want the physical force to make all the present property owners who are unwilling surrender their private property to the common fund. You would want that physical force to dispossess them. Then Besant, writing in the National Reformer in October 1887, announced a conversion to socialism and resignation of co-editor of the newspaper. When I became co-editor of this paper, I was not a socialist, and although I regard socialism as a necessary and logical outcome of the radicalism which for so many years the National Reformer has taught, as in avowing myself a socialist, I have taken a distinct step. The partial separation of my policy in labour questions from that of my colleague has been of my own making, not of his. And it is therefore for me to go away. Over by far the greater part of our sphere of action, we are still substantially agreed, and are likely to remain so. But since as socialism becomes more and more a question of practical policies, differences of theory tend to produce differences in conduct. And since a political paper must have a single editorial programme in practical politics, it would obviously be most inconvenient for me to retain my position as a co-editor. I therefore assume my former position as contributor only, thus clearing the National Reformer of all responsibility for the views I hold. Annie joined the Social Democratic Federation and the Fabian Society, and associated herself with Walter Crane, Edward Aveling, H.M. Hyndman, and particularly George Bernard Shaw. Here's Shaw. Shaw and Besant developed a relationship, and Shaw invited her to cohabit, to which Annie responded with a list of her terms. Shaw responded, "Good God, this is worse than all the vows of all the churches on earth. I'd rather be legally married." In June 1888, Besant learned of the plight of the young women who worked at Bryant and May's factory in East London. Here the young women earned less than 5 shillings a week and often had their wages reduced by an elaborate system of fines. Even worse, their health was seriously affected due to the use of white phosphorus, which not only caused a yellowing of the skin, but an illness commonly known as fuzzy jaw, whereby a side of the face turned green, then black, with foul-smelling pus, before death ensued. Bryant and May's response to any young woman showing symptoms was to dismiss them. On the 22nd of June 1888, Besant wrote an article in another of her newspapers, The Link, the article entitled White Slavery. The company responded by demanding that each member of their workforce sign a statement saying they were happy with their working conditions. Some refused. They were dismissed. 1,400 women responded by coming out on strike, and they won their dispute. This was hugely significant, in that not only had young women taken on the might of Bryant and May, but this was an important step in the formation of trade unions for the unskilled, which was followed up by the dockers' strike of 1890. Annie's exact contribution is a matter of some dispute, but she undoubtedly provided women with publicity and guidance. By the late 1880s, Annie's opinions were changing again. And it seems that a conversion to Theosophy dated from June 1889, when she reviewed Madame Blavatsky's The Secret Doctrine. In the baldest terms, Theosophy was based on Hindu ideas of karma and reincarnation, with nirvana as the eventual aim. While socialism might have been a stretch for some of her former free-thinking radical colleagues, this was simply a step too far. In 1891, she resigned from the National Secular Society, taking the copyright of her various publications with her. It was a bitter, bitter blow, and most NSS members knew their loss was a heavy one. In 1893, she left for India, where she devoted herself to her new religion and the cause of Indian nationalism until her death in 1933. And here she is pictured with Gandhi. There are several biographies of Annie Besant. The best, to my mind, by far, is Arthur Nethercott's The First 5 Lives of Annie Besant. Also, although it is in no way a biography, Louise Raw's Striking a Light is a fascinating account of the matchwomen's dispute and includes an interesting reassessment of Annie's role. Thanks for listening. If you want to contact me about this or any other aspect of secularist and NSS history, my email address is r.w.forder@btinternet.com.